Okay, now that we have taken a look at the graphics we need to create, Zach's going to get started by working on the Cell Sprite first. Now, of course, this is going to be a very small graphic. We're going to be dealing with 64 by 64. And as we've already said, with the Cell Sprite, we need to make sure that it is a grayscale image because we're going to be controlling it ourselves in code so that we can have it represented as green when it is alive and doing well. And when it's being attacked, basically that color is going to shift over to a purple as it gets closer and closer to death. So, Zach, let's go ahead and start off with our new document here.
Which is already set to 64 by 64, and we'll click OK. Also notice that it was set to RGB color and not grayscale or anything like that. Now, it might be a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and press F real quick. I'll go ahead and zoom in before I do anything else because I love having that big canvas. It might be easier on you if you go to Image, Mode, and just immediately set this over to grayscale, so that as you paint, there is no way for you to actually add color information. This way you're guaranteed 100% from the get-go that this is going to be a black and white image. So with that, let's create a new layer. And I'm going to name this layer Cell Body. And what I'll do is grab my paintbrush. Now, my paintbrush is currently set to 1 pixel. You'll notice I've already pulled down my opacity. All I've done is really pull that down to somewhere in the high 60s. I'm not really all that precise with this. And it's a color of black. Now, I am using a Wacom tablet or Wacom tablet. I'm not open for correction on that. I don't care. And I'm just tracing out sort of a blobby shape. Now, if you're using a mouse, that's fine too. Just something that's a little bit irregular and takes up a pretty fair portion.
Well, you know, like a cell.
Yeah, like a cell. Unless it's a plant cell. Those are pretty boxy. Which I only remember because I had to look this up recently. Okay, so there is our cell body. Now, with that down, I'm going to create a new layer. And this new layer I'm going to call Cell Components. Now, this is going to be a layer in which I'll put all of the bits and pieces that actually go inside a cell and allow it to do what it does. So we'll put in like the cell nucleus up here at the top. We'll make sort of a funny kidney shape. Maybe darken that part of it up a little bit. And just because I think it should have them, we'll put some dots inside the nucleus.
Okay.
And then down here on the bottom, we'll put in the... I guess this would be like the mitochondria or something. So there we go. And then let's make some little random bits. And there's the smiley.
Yep, sure is. It's being smacked upside the head with a piece of steak.
And there we go. So there is the basis of our cell right there. Now, from here, we need to, quote-unquote, colorize this. I use the term loosely, of course, because we have a grayscale image. But what I'm going to do is pop down to the cell body layer. I'll hide the cell components layer and get my magic wand tool and just click right here in the middle of the cell body. Now, let's pick a color. Now, it might help if you're not used to working in grayscale to just pretend like you're not for a moment and choose a color that you'd like this cell to be. Now, in the game, we have like this kind of bright green, so pick the...
I'll be honest with him. At first, Zach went with a pink color.
It was pink, yeah.
He really wanted the human, fleshy, pink-colored cells in there.
So we could start with pink. That's totally cool, and it'll automatically convert that to the appropriate shade of gray. So if you're not used to working with grayscale, I know some people have a hard time internally processing, various shades of gray while they're working. Or, trying to...
So then there you go.
There you go. So anyways, there we go. Let's go ahead and drop this color in. We need a new layer to do this, though. So we'll create a new layer. I'm going to drag this underneath the cell body layer, and we'll call this Cell Base Color. Which, again, is kind of funny because this is a grayscale image, but, bear with me. So there we go with our flat color. Now we need to add some sort of depth to this. So I'll create a new layer on top of this. And here's the deal. I can come in here and I can pick a darker shade of whatever color we were using, which of course will just turn out to be a darker shade of gray when I start painting. Let's change my brush around a little bit, though. Let's make a nice, big, fat brush. Maybe not that fat. This will probably work. Let's pull down our opacity a lot so I can layer up some brush strokes. I'm also going to set my stroke type to multiply. and I'm just going to start painting on some brush strokes, and immediately we get a little bit of a problem in that I'm starting to run outside the lines, which is
Zach's not doing the old comic book thing here.
right. It's a little bit
coloring book, yeah.
It's a little bit. No, that is how I did coloring books. So let's go ahead and hold down Control, and we'll select the cell-based color, and we get that nicely selected around like there. Let's make sure that our currently layer 1, but it's going to be our shading layer selected. And we'll click on our layer mask button and just mask that out.
Very nice.
Now we can scribble however we want to, and we'll never be able to go outside the line. Let's go ahead and name this. We'll call this cell shading. Har har. It's like only 3D people think that's funny.
Guess I'm not into 3D.
All right, fine. So it wasn't funny at all, but you could have gone with it anyway.
I am. That was great. That was so funny.
Cool. Now I'm being mocked. Brilliant.
Never.
All right, so we darken that up. Now, if you don't want this kind of smudgy look where you can see these individual strokes, remember that you do have access to the blur tool, which you can just scribble all that right out. And maybe it'd be a good idea to darken it up just a little bit further, so we get our brush back out. Maybe a slightly smaller brush, too. And I'll just continue with what I'm doing, which is, again, just adding a little bit of depth here. You can just hear that tablet going crazy. Okay, now let's get the blur tool out again, and I'll smooth that back out just a bit. So there you go. So now we've got a little bit of depth. Oh, I'm actually not 105% satisfied. I'm going to darken this up just a little bit over here, and then pull that down a little bit, and then blur that back out. And then I think I'll be happy.
Okay.
All right, now we can continue.
Okay.
Okay, from here, I want to add on a little bit of specularity. So we'll create a new layer, and let's go ahead and name it before I do anything else. We'll call this Cell Specular. I'll hold down Alt and drag and drop my layer mask on top of this. Now, there's kind of a funny thing that comes in here. A lot of these layers, you'll notice I'm using this layer mask over and over again. If you didn't want to do that, if you thought it was redundant or for whatever reason you only wanted to be able to edit one layer mask to control everything, you could grab every single part of your cell, drag it into its own group, open up the group, and you can apply, by holding Control and dragging, that layer mask directly to the group itself. So now we could, if we wanted to, get rid of these layer masks. I don't mean to double click it, so let's get out of there. I'm trying to do that with a tablet stylus. It doesn't always work the way I want it to. Let's just right click, delete layer mask, right click, delete layer mask like so, and then just Control D. So there we go. The only other thing about doing that is you might want to make sure that your mask is nice and tidy, because you'll notice we now have some rough areas here on the outside. Part of that, though, is because our drawing, the actual cell body that we drew out, is still inside the group. So if we drag that just outside the group like so, that helps that out a lot. But you still might want to go in there and maybe soften up that mask, or maybe come all the way in, go into Filter, and do a very low-level Gaussian blur. Maybe even 0.2 would work. Let's try pushing a little higher, though. Oh, that looks pretty good. I get picky between 0.2 and 0.3. So there you go. Just a way to kind of soften up that outer edge if you want to. All right, so back to what we were doing. We've got our darkened area. We want to add some specularity. Let's go down to our cell specular layer. I'm going to switch around my colors so that I'm using white now. Let's get our brush out. Multiply will not get us anywhere. If you leave your blend mode at multiply, none of your strokes will show up if you're trying to paint white. So let's set this to screen. I'm awaiting emails. I'm trying to follow along, but I don't see any strokes.
Well, yeah, if you take a number, multiply it by 1, it's going to be the same number.
There you go. And all I'm doing is building up some strokes to get sort of a specular highlight up here in the upper left-hand corner. Probably wouldn't hurt to put a little bit down here, too. And we could also take our cell components and turn those back on and maybe drag those underneath the specularity so that we get this kind of gel effect where you can kind of see the components down underneath there. I don't know. I almost don't like how that completely disappears. I'll deal with it in a minute. Right now I don't want to think about it. I'm going to think about something else.
Okay.
I get too distracted, I won't be able to complete the video, though. All right, so let's say that looks pretty good for our specularity. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to just come in here like we've been doing and clean up any random strokes by running a quick blur over the whole thing. So let's see, if we take our drawing, which we made sure... Oh, cell components, there we go. Oh, did you see what I did?
I sure did.
I was actually painting directly on the cell components layer after mocking myself for that sort of thing earlier. Let me see how far back I can undo. Oh, that's so painful when I do stuff like that.
But it happens.
It happens
all the time.
So yeah, I'm gonna ride through it, and the way I'm gonna fix it is by coming back in here and going back down to a single brush. I'll just come back down to normal and not quite so light on the opacity, and we'll just trace some of that back in.
There you go.
Instafix.
Yep.
So for those that can't have it both ways. Okay, so yeah, I botched that a little bit, but we got around it. So now, underneath this, I need to start colorizing the various components of my cells. And again, I love using words like colorizing on a grayscale image, but let's call this component color. And let's get a darker shade of gray than what we've been tracing. So, I mean, you can always grab your eyedropper and then, get something darker. Again, it doesn't matter if you choose a various shade of color. It's going to disregard that anyway. And since we're underneath the cell components layer, we should be able to just, get your brush out. That'll help. Make our brush a little bit bigger. That looks a little funny. Oh, it's because I had that low opacity. Let's put our opacity all the way up. I don't have to worry about that then. So that's a little dark.
But easy to fix. So we'll just darken that up a little bit, and then maybe take that opacity and pull it back just a tad. And then let's maybe get a lighter shade. Let's see how this looks. It's not too, maybe darker than that, because we're down there underneath that specular highlight anyway. Yeah, I think that'll work. Okay. Yeah.
So let's back all the way out and have a look at everything. It looks like a cell to me. It's all shiny.
Okay.
So you can tweak anything maybe the specularity is a little too bright. You can, of course, pull that down a little bit. Hopefully you were a little cleaner about your layers, and your specularity really will be on a separate layer, unlike mine. We can also grab our component color, though, and let's set this over to white. Maybe, our opacity is already pulled down a little bit. We could very gently lighten up these little dots over here just for a little bit of effect.
Sure.
Just have some variation. And there you go. So with that, we've got our cell all nice and painted out. Now, the only other thing we need to worry about from here is what's going to be used for transparency. Mm-hmm. Now, because we didn't paint anything on the background, we can at any time just hide the background layer. And you'll notice in my particular case that my background is completely gray when I go transparent. That has to do with my personal settings, which you can come under Edit and jump down to Preferences. And if you go under Transparency and Gamut, you'll see that I have mine set over to Custom. So if we set that back over to Light, which is the default, you can see all that. Now, that's a really nice thing to be able to change over occasionally if you can't tell whether or not you can see through something. Like sometimes I've seen, like in the past, these will line up perfectly with pixels.
Right.
It's a little tricky to tell whether or not you have transparency or not. So be ready to change that when you need to. But with that, I think we've got the transparency we're looking for. So I guess the only other thing I would bring up is you'll notice we kind of fade out a little bit as we start to reach the edges. And sometimes it can be tricky to tell if you have maybe a little bit of transparency that's washing over the edges. And in general, it's a good idea to avoid the edge of your sprite. So there's no way the player can see like a harsh cutoff of anything that you have.
Sure.
So if you need to double check that, a quick test that I will occasionally run is to take the topmost layer, and on top of that we'll put on a brightness contrast. And we'll just kick that contrast as high up as we can go and then pull that brightness down as far as it will go. And just by using this, and because it's a non-destructive adjustment layer, you can just leave it there and just turn it off and on when you need to. That will take any pixel that had really virtually any amount of shading to it whatsoever, and it'll make it a lot more apparent, a lot easier to see. So you can just turn that on and off when you need to see if you got too close to the edge.
Very nice.
So that is going to wrap up the creation of our cell.
So, of course, just make sure that you save your file out.
Yep, so we'll start off by doing a save as, and
yeah, we've got some there. We'll just go in there and replace the one we've got.
We'll just replace the one we've got. So we have already sitting here, we have our cell1.psd. So notice that I've got a folder called original PSDs. So that's a place where I can save this, I guess I want to replace it. Thank you. This is where I can keep all of my layers in case I need to go back and adjust something later, or, just so that I don't have to redraw the whole thing.
Sure.
But then when I'm done, also do a save as and save this out as a PNG, which is going to be our final file format for the actual game. So there's cell.png. Yes, we want to replace it. No interlacing. Just go ahead and click OK. And there we go.
Awesome. I guess that's going to wrap it up for this video. And in the next video, Zach is going to be creating the antibody. Thanks a lot, guys.